The Second World War not only changed how people lived, but where they lived. 16 million Americans put on uniforms during the war and headed for training camps and their assignments at home and abroad.
Women also joined the armed forces. They joined the WACs, the Women's Army Corps. They joined the WAVES, which was the women's branch of the Navy, and they also joined the Women's Army Air Corps. Now, most of these women did not serve overseas. The idea behind putting women into the military was that they would do the support jobs so that the men could be freed up to go into combat. So most of the women who were in the WACs or in the WAVES actually served at home in clerical and administrative functions. There was, however, a group of women pilots who trained Army pilots to go into combat. They trained them, but they were not members of the military, and they were not allowed to join the military. So they were never eligible for GI Bill benefits after the war.
Millions of job seekers headed for the centers of transportation and industry. California alone saw its population grow by nearly 2 million. Boom towns like Los Angeles, Seattle, Baton Rouge, and Detroit attracted hundreds of thousands of would-be workers. 70,000 people poured into Washington, D.C. in the first year after Pearl Harbor to administer new agencies created. During World War II, big government became a permanent fixture of American life. Back in 1938, Roosevelt had called the South the nation's #1 economic problem. FDR used the war to accelerate the region's economic development. The states of the old Confederacy received a disproportionate share of defense contracts, including nearly $6 billion of federally financed industrial facilities. No group was more affected by the war than Southern blacks. 750,000 left their farms for jobs in southern cities. Renewing the great outward migration of World War I, 1.5 million left their homes to seek employment in the war plants of the West and North. The war also revitalized African Americans' struggle for racial equality. How, they asked, could America fight a war in the name of freedom and democracy, while at home it still discriminated against African Americans and other minorities?
One of the real problems that Americans had in fighting the war was that they were fighting the Nazis, a racist government which was well known for its horrendous racial policies. The American racial policies are not all that good either, because Americans have a racially segregated society, and it's very, very hard to maintain the racial segregation in the United States when you're being pressed to fight an enemy who is known for his racism. So what the war does is put pressure on the ancient bad racial attitudes of white America, and it ultimately leads to the desegregation of the armed forces, and I think ultimately to the civil rights movement.
In 1941, to protest discrimination in the nation's war industries, labor leader A. Philip Randolph threatened to march 100,000 blacks on Washington, D.C. To prevent this, FDR issued an executive order creating the Fair Employment Practices Committee, which outlawed racial discrimination in America's defense industries. African Americans would make significant economic gains during the war, moving up the occupational ladder into skilled jobs previously reserved for whites only. But their advances did not take place without conflict. The movement of minorities into the nation's cities increased long-standing racial tensions. In 1943 alone, 250 racial conflicts exploded in 47 different cities. In Detroit, 30 hours of rioting left 34 people dead and property damage in excess of $2 million.
A number of Native American Indians served in the Army, and some of them were in famous units. There was a famous Navajo unit that used their native language to fool the enemy, because instead of using code, they talked in their native language, and the Japanese could never figure out what they were doing, and so never broke their Navajo language. In other cases, Native Americans were used as scouts.